I'm super excited about this project. It is the fourth attempt at trying to apply this technique, and it's actually starting to work. And so I'm super excited about this. Granted, the shapes are smaller, but all the same. I made the math fit the shape, so I had to have the project before I made a loose formula so that then I could scale to any disk. Essentially, what you're seeing is I wanted the depth between the beak to be about a third of the overall height, and I've accomplished that. But that's what I used to create where my starting points are going to be, because as we raise this up, mixing the Western style of raising and the Shibori style of raising, um, that gives us a really good generation point. So I'm pretty happy with how it's advancing. These steps, I've numbered most of them. If I know around in the 40s, I swapped a few numbers on accident, but it's okay. Like the math is still pretty similar. I'm probably only one step off or so. Um, I've sped up or skipped a few steps in these earlier stages because they are so redundant. But here you can see where that ripple is coming from, and it's being pushed from the outside toward the in to try and continually push into those structures instead of pulling against them, instead of dragging against where the stress is going to be. You're kind of gently coaxing and pushing it in. And I'm using a wooden mallet for the most part. I am using some metal tools here and there. Sometimes that's the only thing that fits, and that's all that I have. And sometimes you just need that extra muscle. The lesson learned from this project, because in the other projects, I didn't have enough perimeter or skirting to actually feed the project. So what happens here is you're seeing is as I'm trying to get the beak points to develop, I've managed to raise the vessel too fast. So the parallel walls, the deep walls of the cup shape, are actually acting as the restriction against how the beak grows. And that resistance means that as I try and bring the circumference around the the perimeter of the mouth closer in, as I'm trying to downsize that, I have got all this extra metal fighting me, and it's advancing slower and slower. So essentially, you can create a bottleneck if you don't resist the urge to advance too quickly. So instead of parallel walls at this point, I would have liked a more fan shape, more like a bell or something like that. Um, in the early 30s into the 40 range, right where we're at, the most dangerous thing I was playing with was how do I downscale now because I've got that restriction access. And right there you can see the pinching between the two structures in the middle. And that is terrifying and also super exciting for me because what that means is there is an acclimation in the raising when you're pushing from the outside and pushing in. And as you keep downsizing, I was only using like really simple ball stakes, trying to avoid at all costs actually using stakes inside uh, the the beak because I didn't want any pinching, I didn't want any thinning in the tips. I needed that to survive so that when I started pushing on them from all sides during the chasing, the metal isn't just there, but it isn't fatigued to a point to where it feels like it's falling apart, where the crystalline structures are just literally breaking down from overuse. Another lesson that I learned here, if you don't develop the conical shapes at the right point, it becomes really demanding. So the earlier you can get the beak shape in, the better. So in addition to avoiding perfect parallel walls too soon, trying to shape in the conical shape to fight um, where everything is going. Like I don't want the focal point, like it going into a sharp point or anything. And I did want to bend the beak over. So I left it in these really round, knobby ball, like they look like bear ears right now or something, but I wanted them round. Knowing what I've done now, looking back, I know to leave probably the one on the left, or whatever's going to be the bottom beak needs to become either the conical shape sooner, or it needs to be slightly smaller than the other one, specifically for a bird. Excuse me. That's mostly because the lower beak, the jaw, is so petite. It is literally just like that bone structure of the beak itself, and then it just, fades into skin for the rest of the animal. But in the 40s here, now I'm starting to bring down the actual size, the circumference, the girth of the cup itself. And every time I do that, every time you bring it in, it pushes against what is the opening of the mouth. And you get more material to work with, but it also means any corners, there's going to be buckling. And anytime you have buckling, you have excess stress, and you're going to want to go even slower than you've ever gone before. And with slightly more narrow wooden hammers, I was able to clean the inside of the beak, the inside of the mouth, and it really gave me access to shape them without I was fighting buckling, but it gave me access to help that buckling spread out and try not to overdevelop. Because eventually you want to use the buckling to your advantage to help you create the opening of the mouth, but at this point it is still a little too early to be putting it in. I'm just so excited that this has worked. There was a ton of shape things that I would have done differently, like the lower jaw being a little bit more petite, but at around 44 I did start melting in pitch, because the shaping stakes were only going to create damage for pinching at this point, and I wanted to acclimate some of the shapes in there. So at this point I'm just going to switch over to footage that I filmed in person, but hopefully some of these notes have been helpful, and you're going to see some of my thoughts and comments on this while I was in real time stumbling into these different learning curves and how I want them to be different in the future.
I was super worried about this, and just dropping the peripheral volume around the eyes, making these eyes pop out and the brows pop out by pushing this surrounding area down. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's finally starting to look like something, I was super worried about that. The mouth is still a little funky. It's getting there. This is after a kneel 48. I'm pretty happy with how it's advancing. I kind of want to push the eyes out from the inside just to give those highest spots a little bit more space for me to planish like a perfect sphere for the nice glossy eyes. I also want the slope of the side of the mouth right here to not be quite so straight, because right now there's no gradient, right? There's no arrow shape past a certain point. And depending on the bird's posture, that goes further. We'll see what I can get. I'm not opposed to what I have, but with a few more passes, I'm really looking at getting this shape brought in a little bit more to try and make that lower jaw more narrow. But pretty happy. And again, that's 48 anneals. That isn't 48 passes, so I'm probably around 52 passes, something like that. Let's catch up real fast. So I'm working on a piece that I think is going to turn out safely. This is a single piece of copper. I'm approaching pass number 50, and I'm worried I made the ends of the beaks too broad. I'm going to try and chase them down. I've already done some work in the body, so as I push, I've already filled it with pitch. So as I push around the outside, I'm not too worried about it disforming and putting stress, maybe too much stress in really weak spots in the structure right now. So it'll allow me to kind of narrow and focus out the beak. This orange line, I want that nice gentle swoop. The bottom of the beak on this hawk is super narrow, and even in my clay sculpt, I have it a little broad because I was looking at this hawk getting strangled by what it was eating, and I just, God, that's cool. It's so cool. And so I tried to capture some of the posture, but you know, it's only so good, and that's why this is, you know, really a test for the larger piece, because I mean, you can see there's no snake in its mouth, right? So I've got a larger piece to do, but this is going to be super educational on how to plan for that structure. I've got the hook for the front of the beak to develop, and what I want from this pass is to really bring out where those eyes need to sit and their focal points so that they become centered. You know, I don't really have access to the inside. I can make a snarling iron or two and just bump a spotter here and there, but it really does put a lot of stress on the piece when you have these competing structures. Something else I would have done a little differently is I would have made maybe the width of the mouth a little wider, and something I'm going to try to address in this piece is the angle of that mouth. In almost every bird I'm looking at least in the raptors that I've been looking at, the angle of that outside beak is, it's got a way nicer gradient flowing to the peripheral of the face, kind of framing the ocular, and those shapes are super attractive. And the lower, what's going to be underneath of the beak is way more subtle. This posture, it's reaching for something, or it's choking, but in every other posture I've seen out of a raptor, this area is way smoother and way more streamlined. So I have some room to work with that, and I did want like a beardy, ruffled feather look. So we'll see how that turns out. I'm just going to keep at it, and we'll see what this one gives us. And it'll be like a fine port, you know, volume versus like a Stein or something. But with this mapping, the pitch is just finally now cool enough to work. So I'm going to do another pass or two, and we'll see what it gives us.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you have any questions about this project or the techniques I'm using in it, please ask, let me know, and I'll be sharing some of the chisels and chasing involved in this project as I'm working on it in the following video. Thanks very much.